Hello students, in the previous class we have studied about respiration, the process of respiration where we take in, when we respire in oxygen and when we expel out carbon dioxide. So today we shall see what are the types of respiration. Now on the basis of the presence or absence of oxygen, respiration is classified into two types. So we have external respiration, we have internal respiration. External respiration is also called as breathing, and internal respiration is called as a cellular respiration. Now in cellular respiration we have again two types, that is aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Today in this video we shall study about the internal respiration, the types of internal respiration, that is aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Let's begin. So aerobic respiration. Now when we take food, the food is broken down into different energy levels, right? So how is it possible? It is possible with the use of oxygen which we take in through the respiration. So when this breakdown of the glucose occurs in the presence of the oxygen, it is called as aerobic respiration. Now during this aerobic respiration, glucose is completely broken down into carbon dioxide, water and energy. So we have already studied about this, that when we are doing respiration, at that time the whatever food we are eating, it is getting broken down into different components, right, from complex to simple, and along with this the energy is released, then carbon dioxide which we expel out, then water is also released during the aerobic respiration. Now, aerobic respiration takes place in the mitochondria, which is again a cell organelle, one of the component of the cells, and it can be shown by the following equation. So, this aerobic respiration is taking place at the cellular level in each cell of our body. So, we can see this, how it is taking place with the equation, that is glucose plus oxygen, which releases out carbon dioxide plus water. This is the chemical formulas in the chemical form. Yes. So, aerobic respiration is seen in most of the organisms such as human, dogs, cats, lion, elephant, cows, buffaloes. It means almost all the animals when we can see the aerobic respiration taking place, where we need oxygen to break down the glucose. Clear? Yes. So, before going to the next type, let's watch a video on aerobic respiration.
Respiration is just breathing, right? Wrong. Respiration is the chemical process that supplies the body with energy for all other life processes: growth and repair of cells, muscle contraction, protein synthesis, sending nerve impulses, absorbing molecules, and active transport, to name just a few. It happens in all living cells, not just animal cells, but also plant cells. There are two types of respiration: aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic means with air, and so needs oxygen, whereas anaerobic respiration doesn't need oxygen. Let's start by looking at aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration releases energy in cells by breaking down food substances whilst in the presence of oxygen. It is represented by this simplified equation. But don't forget the energy which is released. Glucose is broken down by oxygen to release the byproducts of carbon dioxide and water. Energy is released, which is then used to make a special energy molecule called ATP. ATP is how energy is stored for later use by the body. Aerobic respiration happens all the time in all cells, usually in the mitochondria. Animals get the oxygen needed from the air through their ventilation systems. Plants get their oxygen from the air through the stomata. Do you remember how photosynthesis works? Compare these two equations. You can hopefully see that aerobic respiration works in the opposite way to photosynthesis. Plants produce their food by photosynthesis and then through respiration release energy from it. But don't be confused. Whilst plants do release oxygen, as a byproduct of photosynthesis, they don't necessarily take in this oxygen for respiration. They just take in any oxygen from the air. Plants respire throughout the day and night, as do animals, but they only photosynthesize during the day, when there is light available. So this is how aerobic, or with air, respiration works. You just need to remember that glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen to release carbon dioxide, water, and energy. In the next video, we will have a look at anaerobic respiration and how it differs.
Okay, so we just now saw a video on aerobic respiration. Let's move ahead. Come to the next topic, that is anaerobic respiration. So what is anaerobic respiration? When a breakdown of a glucose takes place without using oxygen, it is called as anaerobic respiration. So the important point here is in the absence of oxygen or without using oxygen. The oxygen cannot be absent. So without using oxygen, it is called as anaerobic respiration. Now the glucose is not completely broken down into carbon dioxide and water. So instead of breaking down completely into carbon dioxide and water, it forms an intermediate compound. And with this formation of intermediate compound, the release of less amount of energy is taking place during the anaerobic respiration. So glucose, it will break down into ethanol plus carbon dioxide. But in muscles, okay, in muscles, this anaerobic respiration takes place sometimes. So there the intermediate compound formed is lactic acid. Okay. So yeast. Now there are few organisms which can perform this anaerobic respiration. Example is yeast and certain bacteria. So they carry out this anaerobic respiration, and these organisms, they carry out this respiration in the absence of oxygen, and therefore they are called as anaerobes. So those organisms that can exist in the absence of air are called as anaerobes, and they undergo this anaerobic respiration, hence can get energy even without oxygen. As we have just seen yeast, which is an unicellular organism that exists in the absence of oxygen as well. It is a single-celled organism. During this anaerobic respiration, what happens is it is also called as fermentation. So the yeast produce ethanol, okay, or alcohol as a byproduct, as an intermediate product. Now this byproduct is like ethanol can be used in making wines and beer. Okay, so the carbon dioxide produced by yeast is used in the bread making industry. Now this yeast, what is the yeast is giving out carbon dioxide with the less release of energy. This yeast, you must have seen this yeast powder in the markets. Now this yeast powder is used to make the cakes for in the baking industry, because the release of carbon dioxide, it makes the substance fluff. Okay, so because the release of carbon dioxide gas during this process, it causes the bread dough to rise. So you can see the cake fluffs. So when you are making this cake during this lockdown, most of you have tried with the cake, right? So you must have used this yeast powder along with the baking powder and the. So what happens during this respiration is, what goes inside our body is when we are taking food, along with this we are taking in oxygen also during the respiration. So food is getting broken down, then oxygen is breaking this into and release energy, carbon dioxide and water. And this energy is utilized by our body for performing different tasks. Okay, so let's watch a video on anaerobic respiration. Let's begin.
You are running a 1500-meter race. Breathing deeply to get the oxygen so that you can respire and keep up the energy supply to your muscles. Your muscles keep wanting more and more energy, but your lungs can't keep up. Do you have to quit the race? No. In the respiration video, we discovered the difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration, and then looked at aerobic respiration in more detail. Sometimes animals and plants can't get enough oxygen to respire aerobically, such as during intense exercise, but they still need to respire to survive. After all, everything relies on respiration for energy. Luckily, there is a backup plan, anaerobic respiration. In this video we are going to have a look at anaerobic respiration in both animals and plants. Starting with animals. A cheetah sprinting to catch some prey cannot take in enough air and blood around the body fast enough for aerobic respiration. The heart and lungs can't keep up, so anaerobic respiration is carried out instead. Here is the generalized equation for anaerobic respiration. See how it differs from aerobic respiration. There is no oxygen involved in anaerobic respiration. It is much less efficient than aerobic respiration, and much less energy is released. This is because the glucose is only partially broken down. Another problem is that lactic acid is produced. This is actually a poisonous chemical that if it builds up in the body, the muscle stops working and you get a muscle cramp. You can only get rid of lactic acid by taking in oxygen again, and thus replacing the oxygen there. Oxygen is needed to break down lactic acid, turning it into carbon dioxide and water. You know how you breathe deeply after intense exercise? This is your body replacing the built-up oxygen there. So that is how anaerobic respiration works in animals. What about in plants? The oxygen supply can run out for plants too, such as in waterlogged soils. This then forces plants to have to carry out anaerobic respiration, as they too need to respire constantly. Here's a generalized anaerobic respiration equation for plants. Notice how instead of lactic acid being produced, ethanol and carbon dioxide is made instead. In yeast, this process is called fermentation, and it is used to bake bread and brew alcohol. Ethanol is the alcohol found in beer and wine, for example. And in bread making, it is the carbon dioxide that is useful. The bubbles in carbon dioxide help the bread rise by expanding the dough. So you should now know that when our heart and lungs cannot keep up with the oxygen demand, or plants do not have access to sufficient oxygen, we have a B plan, anaerobic respiration. This is when the glucose is broken down directly, but it produces much less energy than aerobic respiration, which is why it's the second choice. And in animals it produces lactic acid as a byproduct, which causes muscle cramps, and so we end up with an oxygen debt which needs repairing after exercise has stopped.
So, I hope everything was understood in aerobic respiration. Let's see the difference between the aerobic and anaerobic respiration. This aerobic respiration, it occurs in the presence of oxygen, and anaerobic respiration takes place in the absence of oxygen. Here in aerobic respiration, complete breakdown of the food takes place. Here the partial breakdown of the food takes place. Here the end products of aerobic respiration are carbon dioxide and water. Here the end products are alcohol, carbon dioxide and or lactic acid, which is produced in the muscle. This we shall study, we shall discuss in the next class. A large amount of energy is released here. Here the less amount of energy is released. The difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration is very important. With this we finish today's topic. Okay, in the next class we shall study about the anaerobic respiration which is taking place in the muscles. Thank you, students.